Góðan daginn.
Góðan daginn.
Got anything in kaffibolla?
No.
Do you want a coffee? All right. Wait a minute. Tvær?
Tvær.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Andie Sophia Fontaine. I'm the editor here at Iceland Review, and today we're going to go over some great stories that have been in the news. We're going to talk about Icelandic nights. That is like knights at the round table, not nights like the opposite of day. We're going to talk about a spider named after a famous president, and we're going to talk about eruption news, of course. We're going to talk about the police getting pranked, and lots of other great stuff. So thanks for joining us. Okay.
Yes, it looks better on one.
Thank you so much.
It's true American.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm here at Parma, which is a relatively new restaurant near Hlemmur Square, and I'm not drinking all three of these coffees, just so you know. I've already had plenty of coffee today, but I'm going to have one of them. Art will have one as well, our creative director and cameraman. So, to start us off, when you think of Iceland in the Middle Ages, you probably think of Vikings. But the fact of it is that the Viking Age actually ended like well before there was like a proper medieval period. But Iceland actually did have a flourishing medieval culture. There were cloisters, there were even knights. And one famous cloister is Þingeyjarklaustur, which is located in the northwest of Iceland. This was in operation from 1133 to 1551. That's a pretty long time for any place to stay open. In 2018, they started doing excavations there, and last year they found the cloister itself. Now, there's a lot of archaeological digs all over the country. I mean, Iceland might not be a very old country by European standards, but as someone who's from the United States, is an old country by my standards at least, and you will find archaeological digs that date back a very, very long time. In this case, they made a recent discovery, a tiny cloth seal about the size of a button. It was like a little piece of cloth that had a seal stamped onto it. And initially, archaeologists thought that this was the seal of a knight. Now, again, when you think about guys with swords in Iceland in the Middle Ages, you probably think of Vikings. But there actually were knights. There were 40 Icelanders who were knighted during the Middle Ages. Something I didn't even know until yesterday, to be honest. But it turns out that the stamp itself did not belong to a knight. It actually belonged to a Dutch fabric company, and they would make bolts of fabric and then put their stamp on it and send it in. And so maybe not as exciting as it belonging to a knight, but it is still a very encouraging find, because that means if something like a stamped cloth could survive for that long, and this stamp probably is as much as 600 years old. If something like cloth can survive that long in these conditions, who knows what else we're going to find in the area. So we will definitely keep you updated where that's concerned. I think it's pretty interesting stuff, and there's all kinds of amazing discoveries they're always making in the archaeological field here in Iceland. Okay, next up, we've got some eruption news. Now, yes, it is true that the previous eruption, which began on May 29th, ended on June 22nd. But ever since then, the magma chamber that's under the Sundhnúkur area, Svartsengi, which is in Reykjanes, southwest Iceland, there's still magma that's accumulating there. And scientists are predicting that there's going to be another eruption in the next 2 to 3 weeks, which we've reported on before. But there's an updated hazard assessment, which is giving indications that there's a high likelihood that this eruption will occur near or even within the town limits of Grindavík, which has already been evacuated and damaged by repeated seismic and volcanic activity. Now, part of this indication, like things are playing out pretty much the way they had last time. And part of this is like we're once again seeing like small seismic activity at the magma chamber. They're estimating that something between 16 million and 19 million cubic meters of magma needs to gather there before like an eruption happens, and it's already at 16 million cubic meters. And now there's these graphics I'd like to show you. There are 2 hazard maps that the Icelandic Met Office issued. One is from July 16th and one is from July 23rd. And they show you how the hazards, the hazard risk, rather, has changed in just this 1 week. As you can see on the first map, Grindavík and the north area it's still yellow, where there's a considerable risk of things like fissures and sinkholes and gas emissions, and yes, eruptions happening in that area. Well, let's look at the map from July 23rd. As you see, it has now been changed to a high risk of those things occurring in that area. That being said, there's basically two scenarios that could play out. One is that the eruption occurs like where it's occurred like the past few times now. And should that happen, we would have as little as 30 minutes warning. However, if the eruption starts to occur just north of Grindavík or within Grindavík itself, we would have a bit more time, a bit more warning, something like an hour and a half. Again, in earth sciences, it's impossible to give like exact figures as like when the eruption is due or what have you, but they are estimating within the next 2 to 3 weeks if things continue the way that they are, and we will keep you updated on the situation as it changes. Iceland is an Arctic nation, but interestingly, there's only two parts of the country that actually cross the Arctic Circle. One is the island of Kolbeinsey, and I put island in scare quotes because at this point it's pretty much just a collection of rocks that are barely peeking out of the water. This is north of the Arctic Circle. The other is the island of Grímsey, which is actually bifurcated by the Arctic Circle. It's a small community. There's about 60 people that live there, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a really remote community. Like it is possible to get there by plane or by ferry, but 60 people live on this island where the Arctic Circle cuts through it. And it's also going to very soon be the home of a new writer's residency, where a group called Nth Space, they've recently been working with PK Arkitekter, well, specifically Palma Kristmundsson of PK Arkitekter, to convert two existing houses on that island and into kind of a writer's residency. So if you've been putting off finishing that novel or working on that novel, this would be a great place to do it. Besides which, Grímsey is a really beautiful location, and you should probably go there if you want specifically to go there to see where the Arctic Circle cuts through the island. You should probably go there sooner rather than later, because for astronomical reasons that I don't quite understand, to be perfectly honest, the Arctic Circle is steadily moving more north of the island, and it's not going to cut through the island forever. So besides which, it's also a very beautiful place. A lot of bird life is there, and it's a very peaceful spot to be. I hope to visit there someday myself. Fun fact about me, I actually used to work as a barista, and I was never good at doing this. But managed to pull that off without spilling it all over the table. So. Tack för er. For our next story, we're going to talk a bit about the Icelandic police. So just over here is the headquarters for the capital area police. And they were recently in the news on account of the fact that a TikTok account was recently created. It called itself Lögreglan, which is Icelandic for the police. It used the official logo of the Icelandic police, but it turns out it was a parody account. At the time that it was discovered, it had exactly two videos. One is described as a comedy sketch involving electric scooters, and the other was a video showing police showing police vehicles rather, with a song dedicated to the police playing in the background. And I'll leave that to you to, oh. I'll leave that to you to wonder what song dedicated to the police was playing in the background while showing police vehicles. We won't know because the account has since been banned. Now, this account was brought to the attention of the police because someone contacting them asking, hey, are you guys trying to appeal to the young people or something with this jokey TikTok account? And they said absolutely not, and they had the account shut down. So the thing about this is that there's actually a law. It's Article 117 of the General Penal Code of Iceland, which is basically the law against police impersonation, that you can't use the official logo, that you can't use uniforms, and the logo you can see on this little sign here, possibly from this distance, and that you can't use the official logo, you can't use police uniforms, you can't pretend to be the police without official permission. And these TikTok stars apparently did not have permission to do this. Well, it's probably overstating it to say that they were TikTok stars. At the time that they were shut down, they had just over 1,300 followers, which in TikTok terms is pretty much nothing. Now, when asked about this, a person speaking on behalf of the police was asked, like, is this something that happens regularly? And she had said, well, yeah, from time to time people will attempt to prank the police, but that they view this case very seriously. It's unknown whether or not they're trying to investigate who is behind the account or what have you, but for now, it is banned at least. One of my favorite parts of rural Iceland is East Iceland. It's a beautiful part of the whole country is beautiful, of course, but if you go into East Iceland, you have majestic mountains, you have fjords, you have access to the highlands. There's a lot to see there. And people travel on different budgets all the time. Like, not all of us can afford to stay in a hotel room. A lot of us will be camping. And for those who are camping, you have some good news. Up in the village of Neskaupstad, they're going to be building a new campsite. Why did they get rid of the old one? Well, the old one, it turns out, is going to be in the path of avalanche breakers, because that's one downside of living in a fjord in the East Iceland, is because, they're very narrow fjords, the mountains are very steep, and so it's prone to avalanches. But one way to save these communities is by having avalanche breakers up on these mountains, and the old campsite is in the path of where they're going to be putting the breakers, so they're building a new one. And this new one is going to be 2.1 hectares. That will include 2 sections for camper vans and 1 section that will have enough room for approximately 10 medium-sized tents. Now, myself, I have camped all over this country. I've actually hitchhiked the ring road of Iceland 3 times now. I don't necessarily recommend hitchhiking as a way to travel around the country, but where camping is concerned, some campsites are of course going to be better than others. Some are very picturesque, like way outside of town. Some are like right in the middle of the town. And I'm not gonna drop any names where that's concerned, but if you're camping in East Iceland, wherever it is that you camp, as long as it's in a officially designated campground, which I emphasize you should do, don't try wild camping in Iceland, please. You're going to be in for a beautiful time. It is an absolutely gorgeous part of the country. Cannot recommend it enough. Iceland is a nation of milk drinkers. For you Skyrim, that was a reference for you Skyrim players out there. But it's true. They love their dairy in this country. You go to a supermarket and you will see dairy products you've never even heard of before. So as you might imagine, dairy cows are pretty important to this nation. So much so that they've recently launched a study of calf DNA, because unfortunately about 15% of calves born in Iceland are stillborn, unfortunately. And it's a mystery as to why this is. It's certainly not the conditions in which they live. There's some very stringent regulations regarding the raising of dairy cows. And so a new genetic study is being launched to see what genetic factors might be at play that makes stillborn calves so common in this country. And if so, if there's a way to outbreed that gene. Now, there is precedent for this. For example, when it comes to our sheep, as we previously reported, they're now trying to replace Iceland's current sheep population with a new population that has a gene that makes them resistant to scrapie, which is a incurable and ultimately fatal disease. And so we might be looking at the new wave of agriculture in Iceland now. Not necessarily genetic engineering, but definitely selective breeding where that's concerned. And the milk drinkers in this country will breathe a sigh of relief knowing that we might actually have some hope for the cattle in this country and the dairy cows in this country as well. Oh, lucky me. So a lot of fish that you buy in Iceland is farmed. It's not necessarily pulled out of a river with a fishing pole or dragged up in a net in the sea. Some fish is farmed, and one of the biggest fish that is farmed in this country is salmon. It's a very lucrative business, in fact. Now, there's two ways you farm fish in Iceland. One is either closed in a tank that's on land, which is very expensive, and another is what's known as open net farming. As I reported not too long ago, this involves like the ring that is floating in the water and a net that is hanging down into the water. Now, this is definitely cheaper because, it's being constantly refreshed by the sea. However, it also carries its environmental dangers. Namely that if a sea louse, for example, makes its way into that net, and there's going to be sea lice because it's the ocean, then it's going to quickly spread to all the other fish that are in that net. And there's also a danger of the net tearing and the fish escaping and kind of messing up the wild stock. So this has been a very controversial subject in this country for a long time. Now, as I reported last time, a lot of the experts have chimed in on this subject. But what do Icelanders themselves think of it? Well, now we know. There's a new Gallup poll that was just released that showed some 65% of the population are against open net farming. And only 14% stated that they were positive towards that industry, which is perhaps unsurprising considering all the negative press there's been around it recently. As I said, having fish farms on dry land is expensive. However, it's also safer, and it's generally going to result in less damage to the environment and less damage to the fish. When you go into an Icelandic supermarket and you're trying to look for salmon to buy, if you manage to get to the supermarket early enough and it hasn't all been bought up, it's sometimes labeled whether or not it was farmed in an open net or on land. And so I leave it to you, the viewer, to decide for yourself which of these products you would rather consume. For our final story here in Iceland News Review, spiders. If you're not a fan of spiders, I would recommend skipping to the end, but we're not going to show any photos of spiders here. This is specifically about a new species of spider that was discovered in Madagascar and has been named after Iceland's most famous president. So this was revealed in a new paper from the New Zealand Journal of Zoology. They were investigating a termite mound in Madagascar, as one does, and they discovered that there was kind of like this three-way war going on at this mound. There were the termites, who were the prey, and then there was these spiders that they had not seen before, had not identified before. They're about 2 millimeters long, and they were preying upon these termites. At the same time, there were also ants who were also invading the termite mound, and they were just pretty much taking advantage of the situation, as it were, grabbing whatever they could while the spiders were attacking the termites. Now, this spider is very, very tiny. It's only about 2 millimeters long. The females are slightly larger than the males. It's yellow, white, almost translucent, and it has a new name. It's Vigdisia rhizadens is the name. If this sounds kind of familiar, it's because the spider was named after Iceland's most famous president, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who was the first democratically elected head of state in the world. The scientist who came up with this name, Ingi Agnason, who was one of the authors of this paper as well, had previously named spiders after Nelson Mandela and Michelle and Barack Obama. So what I thought was interesting about this story, though, was that he added, quote, "Hopefully, Vigdis considers it an honor that a living creature is named after her. Names like this in taxonomy are forever. They'll always be around." So Vigdis, if you're watching this and if this is news to you, my vote is with yes, this is absolutely an honor to have a spider named after you. We should all be so lucky. So that's all we have for you today here on Iceland News Review. Be sure to visit icelandreview.com to see news stories like this and much more. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Be good to each other.